Yeah, absolutely. Hey, good to be here with you, brother. There was several years ago when we started a program at our church during the holidays, and we called it the Holiday Gifts program, or rather, Holiday Lights program, and it stood for Love and Giving Holiday Treasures. And we decided that we wanted to sponsor a couple of families in our area that were really hurting and really needed help around the holiday time. I know a lot of churches have similar programs, but we really wanted to directly impact families. We didn't want something to be just kind of, through someone else. And so somehow or another, we found out about a family that was really suffering and had gone through a difficult time, single mom, 3 kids. And our church family just really took upon that initiative and got all these gifts together and food and I asked her, I said, well, can we meet? Can I give you, I want to meet you. I want to talk to you. I want to get to know you. And so we did. We met in a parking lot, public area, and just packed her car full of all this stuff. And she was just super, super thankful and super grateful. And sometimes things like that, nothing comes from it. That's the last time you ever see them. But some things had happened in her life at that moment, to where she just broke down crying in that parking lot, so thankful that someone cared and loved her family enough to reach out to them. And some pretty cool things happened after that, um, just from that encounter that we had with her through this program. We'll
Awesome.
talk about
Yeah.
that later.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, tell us who you are, your name, where you're from, and an interesting fact.
My name is Jacob Rutledge. I'm the minister for the Dripping Springs Church of Christ in Dripping Springs, Texas. My wife, Jessica, and I have been here for about 6.5 years, working with the church here. We have 3 kiddos. We have Natalie, Easton, and Lincoln. And we actually had 4. Our son Everett, we lost him this last year. And but we've been blessed in so many ways over this ministry and over this time. And interesting fact. Hmm, that's a hard one. I'm a huge Texas Longhorn fan. That's not very interesting, except for maybe my Sooner brothers and sisters that are listening. But yeah. So I'm pretty boring guy. I like to read, drink coffee, and study the Bible. So
Yeah, well, the Bible's exciting, man.
yeah, yeah,
Especially if you apply it in your life.
yes,
It's pretty boring if you just sit there and never share it, never talk about it. But if you
yes,
start talking about the Bible, you're going to be excited about it
yeah,
because
absolutely.
you'll definitely. Well, so tell us a little bit. This show's about strategies and how to
Mhm.
share our faith bravely. So, what are some like 3 strategies usually we go with to help people share their faith bravely?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me personally, I'm really trying to I've always had an interest in evangelism, and to me, one of the most difficult parts of evangelism for me isn't sitting down and doing a Bible study. I think that's overall pretty easy, to be honest with you. I mean, you have so many different tools, but the biggest struggle, in my opinion, is transitioning from, "Hey, how was the football game on Sunday?" to, "Hey, where are you going eternally?" That's a really hard transition to make. And we recently had John Rowe. Did you have? I think John Rowe's maybe
Yes.
been on the
Yeah, he's been
program.
on here. Yeah, he's been on
We
here.
recently had him come and do an evangelism seminar, and that's, well, I can't recommend him enough. It was really good. But one of the things that he talked about was that transition, is that, how do you go and get a gospel conversation started? And one of the things we talked about was, number one, just, I think, showing interest in investing in someone, I think, is really the big step when it comes to this, is because the vast majority of people, if we're being honest, do not care about the people that they walk past every day, right? I mean, it's, "Hey, how's it going? Good. How are you? Thanks for the Coke. All right, see you later." It's these very casual, often meaningless conversations that we have with people. And if you actually take the time to stop what you're doing, to not look at your phone, to look at somebody in the eyes and really invest in their life and ask them about their life, it shows immediately that you have a genuine care and concern for them. Now, if you're just trying to get a Bible study set up or trying to get somebody in the pew, they're going to be able to tell that. I mean, it's not a facade that you can put on. You genuinely have to care about people. So I would say the first tactic, if you want to view it in that way, is just to genuinely care about people, to ask them about their life. And people can open up pretty easily to you. Especially for me, they find out I'm a minister, which I don't usually offer that very freely, not because I'm embarrassed. It's just that sometimes people get a little bit guarded, but then after a while, they begin to open up to you a little bit more. They want to talk to you about their problems. So I would say invest in that. Number two, I would say don't be afraid to ask scary questions. Questions are a big part about evangelism. That's something John talked about. And I found that to be true as well. You got to get people thinking. Before we started, you were talking about asking people, what are you living for? Well, most people don't take the time to think about that. Now, they do think about it when they're laying in bed at night and they don't have anything to distract them, or they don't have anything to kind of numb their conscience. But they don't usually in today's world. So we've got to be brave. We've got to be daring enough to ask these somewhat uncomfortable questions and ask them, hey, if you were to die today, where would you go? If Jesus was to come back, are you absolutely sure that you would go to heaven? That's one of the tactics that John uses in his workshop. And you find ways, and I guess this would be my third one when it comes to those questions and conversations, is you find connective points. You gotta listen. You really gotta listen to people, because they will generally give you something that you can launch off of, and talk to them about the gospel. I recently was talking to a girl at a gas station, and she said something along the line, or she said that she had come down to our area because of a very state-of-the-art rehab program that we have in the area. And she said something like, I think God works in mysterious ways, or something like that. She mentioned God. I said, oh, so are you a believer? And she had a cross necklace on, and she said, yes, I am. She goes, well, I'm Native American. She said, and we believe in the Great Spirit, which there's some similarities to Christianity. And I said, really? I said, well, do you believe in heaven and hell? She said, yes. And I said, so, do you believe that if Jesus were to come back today, or if you were to die today, do you believe you'd go to heaven? Well, absolutely. I'm a good person. I try to be a good person. It is ironic to me that she was in a rehab program, and which is, I was happy for her that she was in that, but she couldn't see that, like, she has struggled, right? Like, we all try and justify our actions. And it's hard for us to see our own sinfulness. But unless someone is willing to ask those questions, she wasn't offended at all that I asked her those questions. Now, some people aren't going to want to have anything to do it. But if you're listening between the lines, if you will, generally people will give you an in into their life to where you can say, hey, Jesus can help with this if you'll let him, And so it requires people like me to stop talking for a little bit, which is tough to do sometimes, and just listen to people.
That's the hardest part, is listening,
Yeah,
because you
absolutely.
have this good news. I mean, with good news, you don't really want to keep it inside if it's really
Yeah,
good news.
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, and you can find out, like, a lot of times I used to take the tactic that I had to convince people that
Mm,
they were a sinner, or that they were depressed or in sadness or unsatisfied, all that stuff. I don't have to do that anymore, because I know that the Bible is truthful, and it says we all know that we're
mm-hmm,
lost. Like, we all know we're in darkness. So you have to have that trust, or, like you said, truly listen, get that trust. And when you have that trust, there have been people who talk to me and they'll say, I'm fine, man. I'm good. Like, when I see God, we're going to be great. And then I get to know him, and then they trust me. Believe them. Like, people believe
mm-hmm.
him. They're like, oh, they're such a good person. Like, they got it together. They're so
Yeah.
happy, but they don't.
Well, and it's hard. Like we say these things to try and convince ourselves, right? Like I was talking to a guy recently I was studying with, and he knows that he's not living the life. I mean, he freely confessed to me that he was not living how he should, that he was living against the will of God. And yet when you ask him, are you going to go to heaven? Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, there's a disconnect here, right? There's that you're living against God, and yet you have convinced yourself that you're okay, even though that you're not okay.
That's
Self-delusion is different, self-deception. And there's a reason why James and all the New Testament writers are constantly warning against self-deception. It's
right.
so easy to do. So easy.
Well, it's like the destination, aren't they? They think about the destination. So when I get there, I'll be saved. But I
Hmm.
always say, yeah, but are you walking with Jesus now?
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, they're going to say no.
Yeah.
But when you say, are you going to go to heaven? They'll say yes, because that's like in the future, and that's
Yeah.
judging some way. But when Jesus said, follow me, he said, follow me now.
Yeah. Good
Not,
point.
hey, when you get to heaven, hey, there's my man, high five Jesus. No,
Yeah.
it's not like that. It's like you've been walking with him your whole life, and he's like, here we are.
Yeah.
You made it.
Good
You
point.
made it. So, yeah, that's good stuff, man. So tell us what happened to the story. I want to hear about that.
Yeah. So we invited her to come to worship, and she came on. I can't remember if she had come on a Sunday morning or Sunday, but I remember she was there on a Sunday night. And I preached on salvation. I preached on the importance of, knowing our salvation, and the confidence that we can have that if we follow Christ, we can know that we're saved, and this is what you need to do to receive His grace. And she asked me afterwards, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And she was like, I need to know. I did this to be saved. I need to know if this is right. And and of course, me at that point in time, I was trying to get her to understand it herself, right? That's just kind of how I'm trained to do. Is like I tell you from the pulpit, but when it comes to one-on-one, I try and kind of lead you to your own self-awareness of these things. It kind of is against my nature to just tell you this is what you need to do, like, because anyway. So that was my thinking at the time, and so I was trying to lead her to that point. She goes, "I just listen. I just need you to tell me, am I lost or am I saved?" You know. And I said, "Well, from what you've told me, it seems according to the scriptures you're lost and you need to obey the gospel." And she's like, "All right, let's do it." And so she was baptized that night. I think maybe a couple of days later, her um, son and daughter were baptized, and then maybe a week or so later, her other son was baptized, and still very faithful Christians. Her daughter's the wife of a preacher, and and that was all the church just taking the opportunity to help someone, and finding them in their need. And I really, that story means a lot to me because it just seems like, it just reminds me that Jesus, we're sitting back here thinking, oh, nobody wants to be saved, nobody wants to know God, and Jesus is like, you have no idea. The harvest is waiting, right? Like the fields are prepared. You've just got to go out there and find people that are looking. That's the difficult part because we're not used to seeking and finding anymore. We're used to sitting back and expecting people to come to us. And Jesus says, "Go." He doesn't say, simply tell them to come. And so, yeah, it was a really, really impactful moment for me, and it's always really stood out in my mind.
Well, and you, when I think about it, because that was with the holiday lights thing, right? That you were
Yeah,
working on.
yeah,
You were a quote light to the
yeah, yeah,
world,
yeah.
and if you look at what you did, your we might call it strategy was Jesus' strategy. He went to those who are what sick, hungry, naked.
Hmm.
They were diseased. They were truly lost. Even in this world, they felt lost.
Yeah.
And so you did that, and then you were able to approach them with spiritual matters and feed them with the bread of life, which is awesome. I love that. So get out there, everybody. Do that. So you got another story for us? Another one, possibly?
Um, yeah, there was one that I was thinking about earlier where, and this just goes back to how our perception about culture, about people, does not always correspond to reality. We had a young couple visiting with us a few years back, and I was getting to know the young man, and I could tell pretty quickly he was a pretty straight shooter. He didn't like to beat around the bush when it came to talking about things, and um, so we got to talking, and he had been worshiping in a community church for many years, and he just was honest with me. He's like, I've really grown tired of how everything seems to be a gray area. He's like, there's nothing really difficult that's taught, nothing challenging. There's at no point where they come down hard on things or come down hard on sin. It's just kind of just very ambiguous. Um, and so he liked that we were willing to speak truth and to, call things as they were. And I said, well, hey, let's get together and let's have a frank conversation about the gospel, And we studied for a while, and he was baptized. His girlfriend was baptized a couple of months later, and had been very faithful. And um, that it was an important moment to me, because I don't, going back, kind of almost going back on what I was saying earlier. I don't want to reject the idea that people don't come to church, and aren't, and that can't be a tool in evangelism. I do think our buildings and having a central location where you can say, "Hey, here's a safe place to learn about Jesus." I think that's important. I don't want to discount that. In fact, in our more privatized culture, sometimes that is more preferential, right? They can go somewhere if they so choose, but at the same time, we have to go. It's got like a give and take, right? And that was one of those instances where it was like he had been invited by someone, and he just happened to be there, found what he was looking for, and you got to you got to strike while it's hot, though. You can't pass by those opportunities. It's like I've told people before: if someone's at your church building, they're there for a reason. So build off of that. They're expecting you to talk to them about spiritual things. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here.
That's
So,
right.
it's like don't assume that you're imposing upon them. Them walking through the doors of that building is essentially saying, I want to know God. I want to follow his word. I want to live, or at least want to know something more than I did know the day before. So that was a really, again, impactful moment for me, and a teaching moment for my own self, because this was a young guy.
Yeah.
And
So if you saw him, you would have been like, nah, probably not interested. Just making that initial
well, I
judgment.
just think that there's this perception of, like, the millennial generations, Gen Z, that they don't care about truth, right?
Right.
That they're too relativistic, that they're just there for the experience. And I don't, I think there can be some truth to some of those generational studies, but I also think they can be dangerous, because they can categorize a certain. It's funny, because I'm a millennial, technically, and so what's funny about millennials is, like, they like to go against trends. Is one of the things about that. They don't like being advertised to, and so they tend to go against whatever is popular just for the sake of going against it. So I find that funny, because it's like, well, the popular ideal of millennials is that they don't care about truth. So actually millennials would go against that, right? Because that's the popular, like, concept, is that it's experiential. Um, but a funny thing about millennials, I'll just say this, is we're the one. I read the generation where it said we're the generation that has the lowest view. Millennials have the lowest view of their own generation, but the highest view of themselves personally. And what I've said is, what that translates to is, there's a big problem here, but it's not me, right? There's a huge problem going on in the world, but it's not me.
That's
It's
not
you
me.
guys, right? And you can see that in culture. But anyway, so yeah, it challenged my own perceptions of my own generation, because it's like, here's a young guy who, he does care about truth, and he's tired of the ambiguity that's going on in the religious world that he's experienced, and he wants something more.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we forget that that what we offer is life.
Yeah,
And I think people don't get it. I think they think, oh, they're alive. Like, people are alive. No, we actually offer real life, like a step into the eternal,
yeah,
instead of living in this world where there's no meaning, no purpose, and it's just
abundance of
like,
life. Yeah,
yeah, it's like, yeah. So that's what we're like robbing people of if we don't share the good news. We're literally
yeah,
withholding. It would be like food and a starving person and going, no, 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 I don't think you want this food. That's
yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And that's why, like you said, the perspectives, the Samaritan woman at the well, that was a change in
mm,
perspective, right? The disciples are
sure,
like, what are you doing, man?
yeah,
So that's a good point. Good point. I
yeah,
would put that as point number 4. Sometimes the worst people are the ones most open. Like, there
yeah.
might be some real tough, mean looking person, and then
Hmm.
they're like ready. And
Oh yeah,
somebody nice is like, you go up to them, you're like, oh, they're totally gonna listen. They're like, get out of my face, man. And you're like,
yeah,
what?
yeah, yeah,
Totally
yeah,
wrong. I'll tell a fun story before we do the call to action. There
yeah.
was a guy, he was praying or about reaching people, and I guess he heard God tell him whatever. I want you to go to the bus station and give somebody a hug. And he's like, what? No, no. So So he goes to the bus station. There's this big, huge guy, like tough gang guy, like big. And he felt like God was like, give that guy a hug. And he's like, no, that's going to kill me, man. And so he's like, but he's like, I had to be faithful. You know, I had to do this. I already stepped out. So he literally went and said, can I give you a hug, man? And he gave the guy a hug, and the guy started crying. And he was able to talk to him about Jesus. But, you know, you never would have done that. Like, you know, there are times, and I don't know about you, but for me, where God calls us to do stuff and you go, no way. It doesn't make any sense.
Is this the twist in the story where you were the big scary biker?
No. I'm not even big, man. I lost that. Yeah. No, it was just a good story for me because the person had done something, which God calls us to do things that don't make sense.
Yeah.
A lot of times. And then when you do it, you go, wow, it makes total sense. That God would use me in this impossible thing. So, you know, be brave. That's why it's called Be Brave, by the way, because God, I know about you, but me, constantly God will give me, hey, go do this, try this thing, give this person, no, pray for this person, go tell him I love him. And I'm like, no, nah. And when I've done it, it's been amazing. So shame on me, right? It says perfect love casts out fear. I just don't have the love, so I got to keep praying for love. And on that note, let's do a call to action. Let's get out there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the call to action is simply to be. I've told my oldest son recently, I'm like, be aware of your circumstances, son, you know, because he's completely oblivious to the world around him. And a lot of times that's us. We are completely oblivious to the world around us. And it's like you're on the bus, you're at the bus stop, you're in the convenience store, you're surrounded by souls. And you might not start preaching hellfire and brimstone to them, but you need to just invest in those people. Be aware that people are around you. You know, show them that you value them and that you care for them, because you might be planting seeds that you're completely unaware of that you can reap the harvest from later. You know, ask the simple question of, hey, is there anything I can pray for you about today? Is there anything that I can, you know, start the conversation there? How you doing? How's your kids doing? You know, the church needs to once again recapture the idea of being a good neighbor, and good neighbors care about their neighbors. They're invested in their welfare. And that's messy business sometimes, because some people have a lot of problems, and you have to be willing to get down in the mud and try and help them through that the best you can.
That's the hard part, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all nice, the idea of talking to people, and then they start opening up and they have all these things, and you gotta,
what did I get myself into, right? Yeah. I've been there, man.
Yeah.
But, you know, but if you can just turn it back to the Word of God, you know, and turn it back to the Lord, you can really help people. You know, you can't, only Jesus can fix them completely, but you turn them to Him, then.
Hey, if you're on the bus talking to somebody and they're just giving you all this stuff, and God comes back, what better place to be?
Yeah.
Than serving Him, even in the mud, because I know Jesus got dirty.
Yeah.
I mean, he was out there on the lepers. You know, he was hanging out with people that no one hung out with. And so when we're on the bus, everybody, that was awesome. Jacob, I'm so glad you're on the show, man, because you brought some awesome strategies. But when you're on the bus or wherever you are, just pretend Jesus was next to you. This is what I like to think sometimes. And say, if Jesus was sitting like right here at my desk, wherever, what would He do? Like, what would He do? Because I believe that He would have looked in love for people and said, you know, that person over there, they got their head down, I'm going to see if I can engage in that. I'm going to see if I can just sit and say, hey, everything okay? You all right? And that's it. And, you know, so I know that phrase, what would Jesus do, people have used, but I would say clearly we know what He would do, and it's what we just got to do it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So
absolutely.
Jacob, I appreciate you, man. You stay strong out there.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for
share
having
the good news. Yeah.
You've been listening to Be Brave. The world right now is a crazy place, and sharing the love of God is the most important thing we can do right now. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit up gobebrave.org. Remember, the love of God is the most powerful force in the universe. Learn how to love like Jesus. See you next time.